I'm going to introduce Chuck real quickly. Chuck is a tremendous friend and ally. We have waded through some waters together, doing some really fun work. And Chuck has also been instrumental at CCL while he was there. He's since gone into retirement. But this whole idea that Lyndon and others, a part of our team there, worked on is, how can you build leadership essentials? How can you take some of these models and concepts and make them as simple as something that you can draw in the dirt with a stick? And so Chuck really, with Lyndon and others, many people championed that concept. And what's interesting with what we're going to experience today and just experienced over lunch is, taking a tool, something like that, and, putting it into the digital age, as Joe spoke about in his LFC talk beforehand. We do sit in this digital age. So it's a bit of a challenge, that we still need to be able to draw in the dirt with a stick and not use PowerPoints and everything, but we're also connected by technology right now. And so how do we continue to learn and grow on our journey? And just, I have worlds of appreciation for Chuck. He has supported me personally on my journey, so it's always a pleasure to introduce you, my friend. I wish we were paddling together, and that's a whole nother journey. So over to you, my friend.
Yeah. Oh, well, welcome again, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Joel. Like, everything triggers something for me. Maybe that's the blessing of old age. Everything is a memory. Just talking to Sue Rose, whom I've known since pretty much, I think, when I first started CCL in 1990 or shortly thereafter, right, Sue? Is that when we met? Okay, yeah, wow, that's a long time. And that was a big shift we saw at CCL. I was all wide-eyed and appreciative of everything, and still am. I love CCL and love what we do, but at some point along the way, we noticed that we were serving the elites almost exclusively, and there was almost a mini rebellion amongst the staff that we ought to do differently and fulfill our mission differently. Our mission was, after all, leadership development for the good of society worldwide. And as Joel mentioned, out of that came simplicity. I think simplicity on the other side of complexity, this idea that we don't all have to be, PhDs to present leadership development or to do leadership development, that we could train people to do it. And some people have a natural talent, and we should get more young people involved. So I think that's part of the trend here. And that's part of what I'm presenting today. I don't want to belabor the background, and let's see, once again, I'm challenged with moving my slide forward. There we go. So you've done this. So here we go. This is what we're doing today for the next 90 minutes or so. So the outcomes, we're leaning into mindsets that help me and others help me and others to repair and transform. I have several tools for you to take away in the spirit that Joel mentioned, the leadership essentials. And as always, part of the backdrop for whatever I try to facilitate is to have fun, laugh, connect, and reflect. And hopefully the life journey exercise can do that for you. So we've already done the first part. We're about to do the breakout groups, sharing your stories. And then we'll go into a plenary where I'm hoping that some of the breakout groups can tell us what was happening in their groups. And then I'm going to do a bit of a reveal here, which I'll start now, which is that this online transformation exercise that you experienced is based on Bill Torbert's 7 stages model of human development. Bill wrote a very influential article, one of HBR's top 10 leadership articles of all time, The 7 Transformations of Leadership. And some of you might have heard about this work as vertical development. So that's kind of a new buzzword that's come out in the last few years for what is really a very old, even ancient set of ideas. And then I actually have another tool for you. We're going to do breakouts and have you self-assess according to the 7 stages self-estimate tool. And then after my session, we'll be doing some action planning. So that's what we're looking forward to. So one of the essentials that Joel mentioned, and you met a fellow named Johannes Yadadny. He's also one of our team now working in the world. uh, doing this service to society, he introduced Leadership Essentials. As Joel said, I asked my friend Stedman Harrison, who was one of the inventors of that, what's a leadership essential? That's what he said, what Joel said. It's an idea so simple you can draw it in the sand with a stick. And so I offer you the From Here to There tool, FHT. Some people say From Here Towards. So it's not always uniform. And it's an essential, it's a storytelling exercise. And it really asks people these three questions that you just dealt with. Where did I, or we, okay, because it can be individual or collective, where did I come from? What are my origins? What's my identity? Of course, that's very relevant today in this world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think instead of talking about people as members of abstract groups and that they acquire identity in some sort of abstract process, it's important to actually ask people what their identity is. Where are you really from? Is an embedded part of the question. You know, not the sort of nice, oh, I'm from Ohio kind of thing, but where are you really from? And then the next question is, where are we now? And then, of course, there's the future part. Where are we going in the future? So we've used this exercise. You've used this sort of exercise if you've done visioning or storyboard exercises in organizations. And the idea is that past transformation illuminates the way for future transformations. So we talk a lot about transformations of people and organizations. By the way, 1990, the word transformation was not acceptable at CCL. In the year 2000, I think the word transformation was not acceptable at CCL. Clients did not want to be transformed. People did not want to be transformed. They saw that as a big threat. And my, how time flies. And then within the next decade, all of a sudden, transformation is on everyone's lips. And yet it's hard for people to see what that entails. But almost everyone, I think actually everyone, has had transformation in their past. So if you look at the past, you say, yeah, boy, did I transform? Then that's a helpful place to be. So it's powerful for individuals and also for groups. And one of the things that we do with this sort of exercise is often introduce it as an individual exercise first, because that really engages people and draws them in. And, you know, there's nothing that creates bonding amongst human beings more than telling your life stories with each other. That, if I had to offer you one trick or tip from my 30 years at CCL, it would be that. Get people telling their life stories to each other in an intimate sort of way, not in a superficial way. This is not ice breaking. In fact, we have a term for it. We call it mediated dialogue. You don't have to remember that, but the idea is that dialogue is important. It's uncovering, you know, deeper meaning, but mediated dialogue, and mediated in our terminology means media, or most often imagery. So having actual images to play with, we invented Visual Explorer for that purpose, is a powerful way to have dialogue. So this is a way to create dialogue. And then I will just say that another useful point of the FHT model is that it's a great entry point for talking about the DAC model, which some of you have used and heard from CCL. And DAC simply stands for direction, alignment, and commitment. So when we teach or develop or engage leadership development, it's always around direction, alignment, and commitment. And those are things people just pick up and run with right away. So from here to there, you could always say, you know, what was my DAC at any point in my life journey? And here is the actual card. So like many of our tools, we've created cards for them, and you don't have to read this right now. This is actually, I will give you this, all this you see on the screen. I'll give you this whole slide deck if you want it. But you'll get this as part of a handout. And as you can see, we're just trying to make this simple for people. Notice the so simple you can draw it in the dirt, which is on the left. So one thing we realized is that we felt this need to ditch PowerPoint. So I'm proud to say I've actually, before I retired, did a whole bunch of sessions without PowerPoint. And it was one of the most liberating things I've ever done. I recommend it to all of you. The tech people at the client site will go berserk because they will try to install a projector of some kind and tape it down and all this. And it's kind of funny to watch. The idea is that, hey, then if you're going to work at the flip chart, you need to be able to sort of work the flip chart. And I think a lot of people are a little bit intimidated because they like the slides and they're complete. But with the essentials model and with this model, hey, you can just draw it like this, FHT with an arrow, and then start adding DAC on the flip chart, and pretty soon you have a pretty good display. Here's this is from a session we did at Rice University. David Horth and I were engaged to do leadership development there, and it was a lot of the sort of middle management type people who were trying to make sense of their past, present, and future. We didn't call it FHT at the time. We called it movie making, actually. So this pops up in a lot of different guises. So we just said, hey, make a movie starting in the past, going to the present, and then going into the future. And then we give people a lot of materials. So what you're seeing here, you know, from is to the left, here, middle, there is to the right, similar to what you just did online, but with, you know, collage tools and cutouts and all the frou-frou that goes with making collages. So that's a brief introduction to why we did the online exercise. I will unpack it after we do the breakouts in terms of Bill Torbert's work. But here's the breakouts we want to do. And I know Joel and Matthew have this queued up. So you'll be breaking out into groups of 3 or 4. Take 20 minutes to do this. Joel, somebody will be doing timekeeping, right? So we can keep an eye on that. And here's your instruction, pretty simple. Have a dialogue, I should say, and share your stories. Hopefully you downloaded your PDF. You can screen share. I asked whether screen sharing was possible in the breakout groups. I'm told that it is. But in any case, share your screens. Talk about just what you did in the exercise. Where you're coming from, you know, what's your story? What were your mindsets in the past? What are your current mindsets? And what mindsets do you need to carry forward that were strengths? And then maybe what brand new mindsets can you cultivate to grow up, as we like to say? That's the vertical part, growing up and meet future challenges. And then we'll return to the plenary for sharing some insights, and we'll take about 5 minutes to do that. And I would appreciate it if someone from each group can maybe take a few notes and be prepared to share, you know, just an insight. You don't have to, I will not ask people to share their whole experience, but just a few insights. So Joel, once again, I turn to you. Is that clear, sufficient? Are we ready to go?
Yeah, that works for me. I think Matthew and Jada are gonna put us into groups now. And thanks for putting the questions out there in chat for everyone. And we'll be momentarily heading into groups. Have a good one. We'll see you on the other side, everyone. Well, hey, welcome back, everyone. I'll pass it back to Chuck here.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. So hope you had a good time. Hope you had some fun. Hope you had some insights. Could we hear from just a few groups? We're not going to have a long debrief on this, but just wanted to hear from a few people. What was it like in your groups? What did you notice? What insights did you have? Did anybody choose the same cards? Is always a good question as the other people. Sometimes that happens.
So I'll speak for my group. It was interesting because 3 out of the 4 actually talked about being optimistic, and that was one of their strengths, and that they want to continue to be optimistic going forward. And I was the only one that didn't bring the word optimistic up, which I was just thinking, I kind of felt a little bit left out, but I also thought, well, that really probably isn't the way I view the world. So what can I learn from the experiences of listening to everybody? And trusting was a big discussion as well. And being a lifelong learner. So I just thought it was interesting where we talked about the 3 of the 4 of us actually had the word optimistic as being really important, and being able to, you know, trusting not only others, but trusting yourself that you're doing things for the greater good.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. Yeah, doing this sort of exercise, I think most of you already know this, but it's important to bring out differences amongst people, but it's stunning sometimes how similar we are, right? So even if we're in a conflictual kind of dialogue situation, finding out that we have stuff in common is important. Someone else.
I'm happy to jump in. So we had a diverse group in terms of age and stage of life, but there was some commonality in terms of starting with a focus on sort of me and climbing and trying to achieve success towards a focus on relationship with others and family and just being in community, serving, and also maybe a larger appreciation of some spiritual or some larger than me kind of questions or insights that I noticed. And really interesting point was made by one person in our group about how that transition is or will be given by grace and not achieved by me, he said. I thought that was very, very powerful. And then just and a couple other themes were sort of moving beyond where we are trying to control things and letting go and being able to trust others, I think. And also a journey towards simplicity with all the clutter and all the different competing elements to more of a simplicity of the powerful, important things. So those were some of the themes that I saw in our dialogue.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Love that. One of the things we learned at CCL is that spirituality is important. And there's a lot of people at CCL that were engaged in explicitly spiritual kind of work. And then the other thing we learned at CCL is that you often get sort of slapped back if you talk about spirituality, because there's a certain portion of certainly the corporate world that's not comfortable with that. And so one of the things we try to design into this exercise, this card deck, was spirituality. And, even to open the door to religion, which is sometimes a third rail in these situations. And yet when I spent time in Africa, doing work like this, it's like, okay, everybody has a religious platform. And if you don't acknowledge that, you're not going to get too far. So some of those catalyst cards I think you've seen had things like prayer was one. Love was one, death was one. We were kind of forbidden in the classroom to talk about death because, somebody might get upset. And I sometimes tend to go too far, and I agree that we should not, in an open classroom, make people talk about the deaths of loved ones, for example. That's going a little too far. However, we've shied away from it so much because it might upset someone. So we tried to bring some of that back because, hey, if you can't talk about love and death and birth in a form of human development, like, what's wrong, right? So someone else?
Chuck, I would say that I had the pleasure of being in a breakout room with Diana, and it was absolutely amazing. And one of the things that resonated with me is that your statement about how people can bond over sharing their life stories, because from my standpoint, the bond that formed between myself and Diana in such a short period of time was pretty amazing and really special, and one that I won't ever forget. So it just validated how you started us all off on this journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. Nice to see you again.
Charles, it's Robert Schott. In observing our group's discussion, a theme of transformation showed up. In part, just life's journey and maturing and realizing things are different, but some of it catalyzed by the pandemic, which was interesting to zero in on it and how that affected. Not all of people's transformations are because of the pandemic, but there was some really salient comments where it maybe forced that transformation to accelerate.
Yeah, great. Obviously, pain, conflict, stress, even death can be catalyzing experiences for people. As we study human development, of course, one of the things we learn is a stressful, seemingly negative experience could often have the most profound positive effects for people. So time for one more, and then I'd like to move on if anyone has a comment.
In our group, we actually came up with the realization, we talked about leadership and how there is sort of this mindset that it is a hierarchical, I'm not sure, I feel like I'm making up a word every time I say it, way of becoming a leader, but that in our common experience, it's almost easier to become a leader when you're presented with a role within a nonprofit. There's almost more trust and willingness to be able to give that role to someone who maybe hasn't earned the experience, where in a corporate world, you almost feel like you have to work your way up. And then as we talked through the transitions, it was a lot about self-reflection and self-realization, recognizing that, we had age diversity in our group. So recognizing that, whether you're on the younger end of the spectrum or on the older end of the spectrum, that you have potential and that you have the ability to do these things. And all of that was kind of brought forth through sudden shift, like a change or a growth or a move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, important for young people to hear these messages. One of the things we encounter as we work with young people much more. Joel was a real pioneer of that at CCL. So is Lyndon, Stedman Harrison, and others. Oddly, that was another thing we brought to the board at one point, or to our management. CCL ought to expand into youth leadership. And there are actually voices that said, no, that's not our focus. We shouldn't do that. And I think that just was proved very wrong, because as we made our forays into that, young people just eat this up. They're so ready for it. So much has been disrupted in their lives that they need the positive message that growth is possible, and there's different ways to do it. So let's talk about growing up. So I'm gonna move into this now. And so we use a model called the 7 Transformations of Leadership by Bill Torbert. His references are in the slide deck. I will share the whole slide deck along with the references in case you're interested in more reading here. And lately, like I said, it's been called vertical development. That term didn't become really popularized until about 7 or 8 years ago. Nick Petrie at CCL started writing about vertical, and it really caught on. Because of course there's something in it that's just naturally attractive to people that want to achieve and rise up and do better, that there's a vertical component. And so here's the deal. Oftentimes people shy away from this notion of vertical development because it seems too complicated. And I maintain it's not that complicated. We trainer types, we researcher types tend to want to dig down into all the nuances. But what I found is that people really respond to these basic ideas, and here they are. So vertical development, the transformations of leadership that really are human transformations, is that human development is an ancient, enduring field of philosophy and science, often tied to the notion of alchemy, the alchemists. People often ask, well, what's an alchemist? Do we really need to talk about that? Because it's in the model, the term alchemist is in the model. And I've actually had people say to me, well, I could teach 6 stages of leadership, but I don't know what that means. So we'll unpack it in a bit, but it's an ancient idea. Another important part of the idea is that human development is both individual and cultural. Sometimes we spend too much time, especially in the Western world, focused on individual development when collective development is especially powerful. Several times in the last couple of days, the notion of being human has come up. How could we be better human beings? What makes us human? So that question is important because actually there's not good scientific answers to that. People call human consciousness the hard problem of science. Like, we know where just about everything else comes from. We can't really say for sure where human consciousness comes from, and it's what makes us human. I often ask people this, and we do a pause and people write stuff down, but in the interest of time, I'm just going forward. But it's an interesting question to ask people. It really is provocative. And I think the answer is, and what makes us human, what is unique about humans is that we make meaning. We're meaning makers. That's what develops in people, the capacity to make meaning. Those are the words of Bob Keegan, more or less. And as we mature or develop, I think those are practically synonyms. We're talking about maturity a lot. Our mindsets become more complex. And someone said there's simplicity and there's a side of complexity, and I think that's also true. And more suited to complex challenges with respect to things like power, time, systems, ego, the notion of leadership. These are the things, the meaning making around the things like power is what develops in us. And so vertical development, I like to say, means we grow up. Okay, so there's a direction to our development. It's not just sort of willy-nilly. It's certainly not just, adding ideas or tools or knowledge or memory to our system, but it's growing up in a semi-predictable sequence of stages. They're often presented as kind of immutable and carved in stone, but they're not. And we can think of these stages as transformations. So there's 7 transformations that we go through as adults, or we could go through. Each one of us transcends and includes the prior one. So it's sort of like a nautilus shell, we don't lose the prior meaning making abilities, but we include them in a larger picture. That's how science develops as well. And so Bill Torbert, our mentor and friend, has identified 7 such stages. And if you're interested in this, you could also see the work of Bob Keegan, Suzanne Cook-Greuter. Jean Piaget started it all in the modern era. Larry Kohlberg at Harvard, and then Ken Wilber is a sort of a spiritual philosopher that's really worth paying attention to. And here are, if I can make this work. It resists me. There we go. Beautiful. Here's the model. 7 stages, starting from the bottom and going up. And I've tried to sort of illustrate it so that as you go up, it gets larger. You subsume the earlier things. And so very briefly, opportunistic wins for self. Often that's portrayed as a negative, but hey, being opportunistic is a thing that we all do. So it's a way of making sense of the world. And each one of these, as Bob Keegan points out, hits its limits in our lives. So that's one of the things that fosters our development. We have a way of making meaning that works, until it doesn't work anymore. And so often when we're very young, we discover that being opportunistic, we get caught with our hand in the cookie jar. And then we learn the rules, okay? And then the diplomatic stage is that we're socialized. We have an appreciation of the rules and the do's and the don'ts of society. And at that age, we want to belong and fit in. And that often happens in high school, thereabouts. And then I'll say when we go to college, it's not always like that exactly, but we grow out of our household, we go out into the larger world, and we realize that, being diplomatic, that is being, savvy to feelings and the rules and so forth, only gets us so far. And if we want a bigger frame of meaning making, we need to become experts on something. And I think all of us, it's safe to say in this room, have hit that stage of our development. We all have learned some area of professional expertise. And then some people just stay there and really get embedded in that and spend their whole lives as experts. Some people, I'm sort of overgeneralizing here, but some people, many of us, find that there's a whole logic to achieving. And so the sort of pinnacle of the achieving stage of meaning making is general management. So a general manager has to be an expert in something, but really they have to include all forms of expertise in a larger framework. So that's an example of how this transcendent includes works. And then people discover that, hey, achieving, doing all these things that managers do, you can do them really, really well, and you still get stuck. And especially in our modern era, we've come to see this redefining stage is important. Redefining reframes problems, complex problems in unique ways. That's the disrupting that's going on now. Disrupting has its limits, obviously. And so here we are gathered together to embrace a more transforming action logic, as we sometimes call these, where we can generate organizational and personal transformations. And the ultimate stage in Torbert's model, although he posits further stages, if you're interested in those, there's something beyond alchemical. And it's this mysterious alchemical that integrates material, spiritual, and societal transformations, sort of blending all those together. And so that's it. That's the model. And the idea is that there's actually a test, a formal assessment that's kind of tricky and expensive. And it will actually assign you one of these stages and say, you are here. You know, so in other words, it's a center of gravity. So you tend at each point in your life to really dig deep into one of these. And through testing, sometimes it's interviews, you could actually score people into these. And so this could be a helpful tool as you meet people in the world and try to figure out what they're all about. You can actually begin to discern their action logic. And so one more thing to add about this that I think is interesting. When I first started studying this, it was around actually 1990 that Torbert was writing and Keegan was writing. And I remember Keegan's book was called In Over Our Heads. Okay, maybe some of you have read that. And there's this idea that in society as individuals, we are in over our heads unless we can develop sufficiently to make sense of our worlds. And so for Keegan, that was more or less the achieving stage, expertise to achieving. That if you didn't have sense making appropriate to achieving, then you're just going to be lost in the world. And so development was necessary. And for a long time, well, for a time anyway, I think that was true. And now when we test people with the formal tests, people are testing at a later stage on average. So it seems like the average stage, at least in Western society, maybe global society, has shifted. So collectively, maybe this is good news. We're all more developed. You know, the bad news is that the redefining is associated with disruption, and it's causing a lot of problems. So the way we're going to work our way out of this is through transforming. And I just put a little note at the alchemical stage, because I think that's where we are. I think that's where you are. And you might protest and say, oh my goodness, that sounds like, you know, a spiritual guru of some kind. Surely I'm not that. And my point is that, first of all, we have to try to have some inkling of alchemy as we do our work as professional development people. You don't have to be there all the time. It's true of all these stages. A lot of them are just states of being, or they're things we could come to in collectives with other people. So I would say that during this period of 2 days with the leadership forum, there's an alchemical action logic afoot here. And so much more to be said about this, but I just wanted to give you an introduction. There's references at the bottom of this slide. I'll put those in the chat and I'll share the slides. So you should have all these. And let's see, I see the chat box is lighting up a little bit. Joel or Matthew, are there any questions we need to entertain before we, oh, I see somebody put in deliberately developmental organizations into the chat box. That's what Keegan's working on now. So I'm checking our time. We're good. Okay, so here's an exercise. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put a PDF into the chat box for everyone. And this is what you'll do for the next 15 minutes as individuals. I want you to follow the directions I'm about to give you and access this PDF. And it's a self-estimate of the 7 stages. We didn't have this before in a public forum. And this is yours to use with your people, with yourself, not to be sold, obviously. So there it is in the chat box. So no breakouts right now. You have 15 minutes. Maybe it'll take some of you 5 minutes. Maybe it'll take some of you an hour. But we're going to regroup in 15. So let me share the instructions. It's pretty self-explanatory. Having trouble moving my slide pages. There we go. Ugh. Of course, they go too fast. Here are the instructions. Okay, good. Using the PDF provided. First of all, I'd like you to reflect on what are the key challenges that you face based on insights from this forum. And given that, which of these 7 life logics or mindsets, a lot of different words for them, often call them action logics, which of these 7, maybe 1 or 2, most accurately describes you now? And I think you should find that in a PDF, you could do some highlighting or circling, just to say, oh, this is like me, this is like me, just individual words in the PDF. And then the next question is, which of these 7, which 1 or 2 of these 7 will you need to develop to meet the challenges? And then again, highlight any text. We'll do this individually, then we'll have breakout groups to share what your choices have been, and you'll discuss them. And then we'll return for a plenary, and I'll answer any other questions you have.